My name is Margaret Ellis, and I am 78 years old. For most of my life, I have been the backbone of my family, quiet, supportive, and always putting their needs before my own. But everything changed on the night my only son, David, looked me in the eye during a family dinner and said the words that cut me deeper than any knife. "You're too old to have opinions, Mom. Just stay out of it." The room went silent. My daughter-in-law, Claire, smirked as if she'd won some silent battle. My grandchildren exchanged uncomfortable glances, avoiding my eyes. My hands trembled as I clutched the edge of the table, trying to keep my dignity intact. The sting wasn't just in his words, it was in the way he dismissed me, as if I were some piece of old furniture taking up space. I swallowed my pride and said nothing. In that silence, they thought they had won. They thought I had accepted my place in the corner, voiceless and powerless. But little did they know, my silence was not surrender, it was planning. That night, as I lay in my room staring at the ceiling, I remembered every sacrifice I made for David. How I worked 2 jobs after my husband died just to send him to college. How I sold my jewelry to pay for his wedding. How I gave him the deed to the house we lived in because I trusted he would care for me in my old age. And now, this same son had the audacity to treat me as though I was a burden, an old woman whose thoughts no longer mattered. I cried quietly, not out of weakness, but out of the sheer pain of betrayal. But as the tears dried, something inside me hardened. I realized I didn't need to argue, I didn't need to shout, and I didn't need to fight with words. I would speak, yes, but not with my voice. I would speak through something far more powerful. I spent the next few weeks observing them in silence. They became bolder with their disrespect. Claire would roll her eyes whenever I asked for something simple. David stopped visiting my room to check if I needed anything. They began discussing my belongings in hushed tones, as if I wouldn't notice. One day, I overheard Claire whisper to David, "Once she's gone, this house will be ours completely. She's just wasting space." Wasting space. That phrase burned into my heart like fire. What they didn't know was that I still held control over the one thing they were so sure about: the house, my savings, and the little fortune I had quietly built over the years. They thought I was blind and frail, but I was sharper than they could ever imagine. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Thomas, and we met privately. "Margaret," he said, looking at me with concern, "are you sure you want to do this?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied, my voice steady. We began rewriting my will. Every detail was crafted carefully, leaving no room for manipulation. I made sure that those who truly cared for me, the people who stood by me when no one else did, would be taken care of. And as for David and Claire, their greed would be their downfall. I stayed silent during those days, letting them think they had silenced me for good. I smiled faintly whenever they made snide remarks, and I nodded when they dismissed me. Inside, I was building my final masterpiece, my last words that would echo louder than any argument I could ever have with them. Then, one evening, I gathered them all in the living room under the pretense of sharing old family memories. David sat with his arms crossed, Claire on her phone, and the grandchildren half listening. I told them about the will. "You don't need to worry," I said softly. "When the time comes, everything will be clear." They smirked, thinking I meant they would inherit everything. They had no idea what was waiting for them. That night, I slipped my signed and sealed will into the safe, where it would remain until the right moment. I went to bed with a strange peace in my heart. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had taken back control of my life. The following week, something happened that would change everything. Claire came into my room, thinking I was asleep, and started rummaging through my drawers. I stayed still, pretending to sleep, as I watched her take photos of my documents. My heart raced, but I kept my breathing steady. She whispered to herself, "We'll find a way to take it all, even before she's gone." The next morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The storm was coming, and I was ready for it. But none of them were prepared for the way I would speak, not with my voice, but through my will. The morning after I caught Claire snooping through my drawers, the air in the house felt different, tense, heavy. I sat in the kitchen sipping my tea while she moved around nervously, avoiding my eyes. David came in and gave me a quick glance, one that carried a mix of irritation and suspicion. "Mom, why is the safe locked with a new code?" he asked casually, though I could hear the edge in his tone. I looked at him, smiled faintly, and replied, "Some things are meant to stay safe, David. You wouldn't understand." His jaw tightened. I could tell he hated that I wasn't explaining myself. He had grown used to me answering every question, bending to every request. But not this time. This time, I was in control, even if he didn't know it. That night, as I lay in bed, memories of my younger years flooded back. How I raised him alone after his father died. How I worked day and night to keep a roof over our heads. I remembered his laughter as a little boy, his promises to always take care of me. What happened to that boy? Where did my son go? The man standing in my house now was a stranger. The next few days were filled with subtle acts of cruelty. Claire served me cold leftovers while she and David ate fresh meals. They started locking the living room at night, as if I were some intruder. The grandchildren were told not to bother Grandma because she was too old to keep up. Each insult chipped away at the love I once felt so freely for them. But I stayed quiet. My silence made them careless, and their greed became obvious. One afternoon, I overheard Claire on the phone with someone. She was whispering, but I caught enough. "Yes, once she's gone, we'll sell the house. It's in David's name anyway, or it will be soon." She was wrong. The house was still mine, and my new will ensured it would never be theirs. Days turned into weeks. My health started to weaken. Not because of age alone, but because of the constant stress. I wondered if they were trying to break me down, to make me give up and hand everything over. But what they didn't know was that every cruel word they spoke only fueled my determination. One evening, my lawyer Thomas came to visit. I told David it was just an old friend catching up, and he believed me. Thomas and I sat in my room, going over the final details. "Margaret," he said softly, "you're doing the right thing. But you must be careful. They seem desperate." I nodded. "I'm not afraid anymore. They may think I'm weak, but my silence is my strength." After Thomas left, I watched from the window as he drove away. That's when I saw David peeking from behind the curtains in the living room, his eyes filled with suspicion. He was starting to sense that something was happening behind his back, and it made him uneasy. The next morning, I woke up to find the safe moved. My heart dropped. I rushed to it, and though they had tried to tamper with it, they failed. The documents inside were untouched, but the fact they tried told me everything I needed to know. They were ready to cross any line. I pretended not to notice, going about my day as if nothing happened. But inside, I knew the final confrontation was coming. They were like vultures circling, waiting for the moment to strike. What they didn't know was that I had already set the trap. The will was ready. My voice, though unspoken, was sealed within those papers. When the time came, they would hear me loud and clear. That evening, I sat in the rocking chair by the window, watching the sun set. Claire walked by and muttered under her breath, "Old witch." I smiled to myself. Let them think what they want. The day of reckoning was closer than they could imagine. The very next night, something happened that pushed everything to the edge. I heard loud voices in the living room. David and Claire were arguing. Claire shouted, "We need to do it now before she changes anything." "Do what?" My heart raced as I tiptoed closer to hear more. But before I could catch the rest, David stormed out of the house, slamming the door. Claire stayed behind, muttering curses under her breath. I knew then that my life was in danger. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about getting rid of me. I stayed awake that night, clutching the phone, ready to call Thomas or the police if I had to. But what happened the next morning would change everything and set the stage for the final twist they never saw coming. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made my heart pound, and every shadow on the wall made me wonder if Claire had come to finish whatever plan they were whispering about. At dawn, I decided to act normal, as if I had no idea what they were plotting. I brewed my tea, hummed an old hymn, and greeted them with a smile that concealed my fear. David barely looked at me as he grabbed his keys. "I'll be back later," he said coldly. Claire didn't even bother responding. She stood there, arms crossed, glaring at me as if I had done something wrong. I could feel her hostility radiating like heat from a flame. As soon as they left, I called Thomas. "They're getting desperate," I said, my voice trembling. He was silent for a moment, then replied, "Margaret, do you want me to involve the authorities?" "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. Let them think they have the upper hand." That day, I spent hours writing letters, one to my lawyer, one to my oldest friend, and one to my granddaughter Lily, the only member of my family who still loved me unconditionally. In those letters, I explained everything, including my suspicions about what David and Claire were planning. I sealed them and placed them somewhere they would find if anything happened to me. By the evening, David returned with a strange energy. He was unusually cheerful, almost forced. "Mom," he said with a fake smile, "we're planning a family dinner tomorrow. We want to talk about the future." The future. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. Claire smirked from behind him, as if she knew some secret I didn't. I nodded calmly, though my heart was thudding in my chest. That night, as I sat on my bed, I clutched the cross necklace my late husband had given me. "Robert," I whispered, "give me strength. I need to survive this, not just for me, but to show them they can't break me." The following day, the house was filled with forced cheer. Claire cooked a lavish meal, David poured wine, and the grandchildren were unusually quiet. I sat at the head of the table, watching them all carefully. Every bite of food felt like a gamble. I pushed the plate away after a few tastes, claiming I was full. I saw Claire's eyes narrow at my refusal. Halfway through dinner, David raised his glass and said, "Mom, we've been thinking. Maybe it's time you moved into a home. You'd be more comfortable there." "A home?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Yes," Claire chimed in. "It's for your own good. You're too old to handle things here. We'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about a thing." I stared at them, my face expressionless. They thought they were winning. They thought they could push me out of my own house, erase me from my own life. I simply smiled and said, "That's thoughtful of you." Their eyes lit up, mistaking my calmness for agreement. Little did they know, I had already rewritten the ending to their story. That night, after they went to bed, I called Thomas one last time. "It's time," I told him. "I'll be ready," he replied. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm. I packed a small bag, took my important papers, and left the house quietly. I stayed with my friend Gloria across town, away from their prying eyes. When David called to ask where I was, I simply said, I needed some air.
"Don't worry about me."
They didn't know that during my absence, my lawyer would be delivering letters and making sure the will was locked into place with the court. 2 days later, I returned home. The moment I walked through the door, Claire exploded. "Where have you been?" "We were worried sick." I looked at her calmly. "Don't worry, dear. You'll find out soon enough why I was gone." Her face twisted in confusion and anger. David watched me carefully, his jaw tight. I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew I was hiding something, but he couldn't figure out what. That night, as they whispered in the living room, I sat in my room with a small smile. My silence was driving them mad, and soon, they would discover that every move they made was only tightening the noose around their own necks. The next morning, Thomas arrived unexpectedly with documents in hand. I watched from my window as he walked toward the house, knowing this was the moment everything would begin to unravel. David opened the door, and when he saw Thomas holding those papers, his face went pale. Claire rushed to his side, her voice shaking. "What's going on?" Thomas stepped inside with a firm expression. "I'm here on behalf of Margaret. You'll want to hear this." My heart raced as I walked into the living room behind him. The silence was thick, and their eyes were wide with panic. What Thomas was about to reveal would shatter their illusions and expose just how powerless they truly were. The living room was tense, the kind of silence where you could hear your own heartbeat. Thomas stood tall, holding a thick envelope. David tried to appear calm, but I could see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Claire clutched his arm, her voice sharp. "What is this about?" Thomas cleared his throat and spoke with authority. "This is an official notice regarding Margaret Ellis's estate. There have been changes to her will, and I'm here to make sure everything is understood." David's face twisted in confusion. "Changes? What changes?" "I'm her son. Everything comes to me." I stood quietly in the corner, watching him unravel. "David," I said softly, "you told me I was too old to have opinions. You dismissed me as if I didn't matter. But I do matter. My voice still counts, even if it's through these papers." Claire sneered. "This is ridiculous. She's not in her right mind. She's being manipulated." Thomas raised a brow. "Actually, every step was done under legal supervision. Margaret knew exactly what she was doing." He handed David a copy of the documents. "I suggest you read carefully." David snatched the papers and flipped through them, his eyes widening with every line. Claire leaned over to read, and soon her face turned red with rage. "This can't be real," David shouted. "You're leaving the house to Lily?" "Yes," I said calmly, looking at my sweet granddaughter, who sat silently in the corner, tears in her eyes. "Lily has shown me love and respect, something I no longer receive from you." Claire's voice cracked. "And what about the savings? The stocks?" "All to charity," Thomas answered before I could. "Margaret has decided that her wealth will help others, not those who seek to use her." David's voice trembled with anger. "Mom, how could you do this to me?" I stepped forward, my voice steady. "How could you do this to me, David? You made me feel like a burden, like my thoughts didn't matter. I stayed silent because I wanted you to think you had won. But now, I'm speaking in a way you can't ignore." Claire exploded. "This is insane. You're going to regret this." Thomas's voice was firm. "Threats won't change anything. This will is legally binding." David crumpled the papers in his hand, his face pale with rage. "You'll pay for this, Mom. You'll see." I felt a shiver down my spine at his words, but I stood my ground.
"No, David."
"You're the one who will see." That night, the house was filled with an eerie silence. David and Claire locked themselves in their room, whispering furiously. Lily came to my side and hugged me tightly. "Grandma, I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice trembling. I smiled through tears. "This isn't over yet, sweetheart. They're angry, and angry people do dangerous things." Sure enough, in the middle of the night, I heard footsteps outside my door. I stayed still, clutching my phone. The door handle jiggled, then stopped. I heard Claire's voice whisper, "Not tonight. We'll find another way." The next morning, they acted as if nothing happened, serving me breakfast with fake smiles. I played along, but my guard was up. Every move they made felt like part of a larger plan. Later that day, Thomas called me. "Margaret, I've received some concerning information. You need to be careful." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Someone tried to access your bank accounts last night. We stopped it, but it's clear they're desperate." I thanked him and hung up, my hands trembling. Desperate people were dangerous. I knew the storm wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. That evening, David confronted me in the hallway. His eyes were cold, his voice low. "You think you've won, Mom? This isn't over. We'll take everything, one way or another." I looked at him with a strength I didn't know I still had. "You may try, David, but remember this. I am not afraid of you." He walked away, slamming the door. My heart pounded, but I stood tall. I knew the battle ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I woke up one night to the smell of smoke. The smell of smoke was faint at first, creeping into my nostrils and pulling me out of sleep. My heart pounded as I sat up, scanning the room. It wasn't coming from the fireplace. It was coming from the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and slowly crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent against the floor. The house was dark except for a faint orange glow flickering from the kitchen doorway. My breath caught when I saw it, a dish towel dangling dangerously close to the stove's open flame. I rushed forward, grabbing the towel and throwing it into the sink, drenching it with water. My hands trembled as I turned off the stove. Someone had left it on. No, someone had turned it on. I knew it in my gut. This wasn't an accident. Behind me, a voice said, "What are you doing up so late?" I spun around. David stood in the shadows, his arms crossed, a strange expression on his face. Claire was behind him, smirking. "The stove was on," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "You're trying to burn me out, aren't you?" David stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You should be careful with accusations, Mom. You're getting forgetful." Claire added with a cold laugh, "Or maybe you just imagined it." I stared at them, my heart pounding with both fear and fury. "You won't get away with this," I said quietly. They laughed as they walked away, but I saw the darkness in David's eyes. They were willing to do anything. Anything. I barely slept after that, sitting in my chair with my phone in hand, ready to call Thomas or the police if needed. The next morning, Lily came to visit unexpectedly. Seeing her was like a breath of fresh air. "Grandma, you look pale," she said, holding my hand. "What's going on here?" I hesitated, but she needed to know. I told her everything, David's words, Claire's cruelty, the smoke in the night. Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't stay here, Grandma. You're not safe." I squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, I have to stay. I have to see this through. They think they can erase me, but I'm not done yet." Later that day, Thomas called with an urgent update. "Margaret, the documents are finalized. Everything is locked in. They can't touch your estate no matter what they do." Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with dread. Because if they couldn't get my estate legally, they might try something far worse. That evening, I pretended to be weak. I let them believe I was breaking down, hoping their arrogance would make them careless. I stayed silent through dinner, watching them exchange smug glances. Inside, I was gathering strength, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Just after midnight, I heard Claire's voice outside my room. "She's asleep. Now's the time." My blood turned cold. I reached for the letters I had prepared, clutching them close. If this was the night they tried to end me, I would make sure the truth came out one way or another. The doorknob turned slowly and the door creaked open. David stood there with something in his hand, a pillow. My breath caught in my throat. Before he could take another step, Lily appeared behind him, her voice shaking with rage.
"Dad."
"What are you doing?" David froze. Claire hissed, "Lily, go back to bed." "No." Lily shouted, "I'm calling the police." The moment shattered. David dropped the pillow, his face pale. Claire grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "This isn't what it looks like," she lied. But I had seen everything. I stood up slowly, my voice trembling but firm. "Get out of my room. Get out of my house." They stormed out, whispering furiously to each other. Lily stayed by my side, tears running down her face. "Grandma, we need to leave. They're dangerous," she said. I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. They're the ones who will be leaving. Soon." The next morning, I called Thomas and told him everything. He assured me we were ready for the final move. "Margaret, once this goes through, they won't have a leg to stand on." I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of years of pain and betrayal pressing down on me. But beneath it all, there was a fire burning in my heart. David and Claire thought they could silence me forever. They were wrong. That evening, the doorbell rang. A man in a suit stood there, holding official documents. David grabbed the papers from his hands and started reading, his face draining of color. Claire's scream echoed through the house. The truth was finally coming to light, but this was only the beginning of their downfall. Because the next step in my plan would destroy everything they thought they owned. The sound of Claire's screams still echoed in my ears long after the man in the suit left. She clutched the papers as if tearing them apart would change the truth written on them. David stood frozen, his hands shaking, his pride collapsing in front of me. "What is this?" Claire demanded, waving the documents at me. "Tell me this is some kind of joke." I looked at her calmly, my voice cold and steady. "It's no joke, Claire. Those papers make it clear that this house, my savings, and everything you thought would be yours will never belong to you. You both have treated me like a nuisance, but this, I tapped the document still in her hand, is my voice, louder than anything I could ever say. David's face twisted with rage. You're ruining everything. You're my mother. How could you do this to me? My heart ached hearing those words, but I refused to let my voice shake. I'm your mother, yes. And I gave you everything. You betrayed me, David. You and Claire tried to erase me from my own home. This is the consequence of your choices. Claire stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. David stood there staring at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Then, without another word, he followed her. That night, the house was unnaturally silent. I sat by the window, the moonlight pouring in, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Desperation was dangerous, and they had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Lily came to see me. She hugged me tightly. Grandma, I'm scared. They're not just angry, they're plotting something. I brushed her hair back and smiled softly. Let them plot, my darling. The more they try, the deeper they'll sink. I'm ready for them. Later that day, Claire returned with fire in her eyes. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You think you're clever, don't you? You think you've won. I met her gaze. This isn't about winning, Claire. This is about respect. Something you never gave me. She laughed coldly. Respect? You're just an old woman clinging to power. But power fades, Margaret. Remember that. She left with those words, but her threat lingered in the air like poison. That evening, as I prepared tea, I noticed something strange. The sugar container was open, and the granules looked slightly off. I froze. I had seen enough crime shows to recognize the danger. Someone had tampered with it. My hands trembled as I carefully set the container aside. Claire's voice echoed from the living room. Is she drinking it? My heart nearly stopped. I poured the tea down the sink and pretended to take a sip when I returned to the table. Claire's eyes narrowed. Hours later, I called Thomas. They tried to poison me, I said, my voice shaking. He cursed under his breath. Margaret, you need to get out of that house tonight. I'll arrange for immediate legal action. They've crossed the line. I packed my essentials and left quietly with Lily. We stayed at a safe location Thomas arranged, away from David and Claire's reach. They had no idea where I was. The next day, I watched from a distance as police cars pulled up to my house. Officers walked in with search warrants, and moments later, they escorted David and Claire out in handcuffs. The neighbors gathered, whispering in shock. Claire screamed, "This is a mistake. We didn't do anything." But the evidence spoke louder than her lies. I stood in the car, watching as the people who once thought they could silence me were dragged away by the very system they thought they could manipulate. Lily squeezed my hand. Grandma, you did it. You're free. Tears filled my eyes. Yes, sweetheart. But this isn't just about being free. This is about showing the world that even when they try to take your voice, you can still find a way to be heard. Yet, even with them arrested, I knew their influence hadn't completely ended. They would fight back legally, and they still had allies who might try to twist the truth. The real showdown was still ahead, when my will would be officially read to everyone, leaving no doubt about my intentions. That day was coming soon, and when it arrived, the world would finally hear my final words, spoken not from my lips but from the legacy I was leaving behind. The day after their arrest, the house felt eerily empty. I walked through the room slowly, touching the walls that had witnessed decades of my life, my laughter, my tears, and now my quiet triumph. Yet the peace was fragile because I knew David and Claire wouldn't stay behind bars for long. They had money stashed away somewhere, and people like them always found a way to crawl back. Thomas called me early in the morning. Margaret, the hearing for the will's validation is set. Once the court confirms it, everything becomes untouchable. Are you ready for this? I've been ready for a long time, I told him. But deep inside, I felt the familiar tremor of fear. Facing David again was something I dreaded, yet something I had to do. 2 days later, they were released on bail. The first thing they did was come back to the house, pounding on the door. Lily and I stayed inside while police officers escorted them off the property. David yelled over his shoulder, "This isn't over, Mom. You're ruining your own family." Family. That word cut like a knife. How could he still use it after everything he had done? That night, I sat with Lily by the fireplace. "Sweetheart," I said, "you're my only light in this darkness. No matter what happens, promise me you'll remember that love matters more than blood." Tears filled her eyes. "I promise, Grandma." The day of the court hearing came quickly. I wore my best navy dress, the one I had saved for special occasions. This was my battlefield now, and I needed to walk in with my head high. When we entered the courtroom, I saw David and Claire sitting at the table with their lawyers. Claire glared at me with venom. David looked away, shame and rage battling in his eyes. The judge reviewed the documents Thomas had filed. Everything was in order. The house was legally mine, the will was valid, and their attempts to tamper with it had already been documented. When the judge confirmed the legality of my decisions, David's face turned white. Claire stood abruptly. "This is manipulation." "She's old and confused." The judge silenced her with a sharp look. "Mrs. Ellis is fully competent. This court recognizes her will as binding." In that moment, I felt a rush of power and relief. My voice, the one they thought had faded with age, had spoken through the law. After the hearing, David approached me outside. His voice trembled.
Mom, please.
"Don't do this. We can fix this." I looked into his eyes, searching for the son I once knew, but he wasn't there anymore. "David, I gave you every chance to love me. You chose greed. There's nothing to fix." Claire hissed, "You'll regret this, old woman." I simply walked away, my head high, Lily holding my arm. That evening, we returned home to find a brick thrown through the window with a note attached. "You haven't won." My hand shook as I read it, but I refused to let fear control me. Instead, I called the police and handed it over as evidence. Every move they made only buried them deeper. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. I saw their car parked outside at night, watching. They sent anonymous threats, hoping to scare me into changing my will. But I stood firm. One night, Thomas called. "Margaret, the final reading of the will is scheduled. All beneficiaries and family members will be present. This is your moment." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Then it's time they finally hear me." The day of the reading arrived. The room was filled with tension, lawyers, relatives, and a few close friends. David sat in the corner, silent but seething. Claire sat beside him, arms crossed, glaring daggers at me. Thomas opened the sealed envelope and began to read. Every word felt like thunder in the room. I had left the house to Lily, donated my savings to charity, and left David only one thing, a letter. As Thomas read the letter aloud, the room fell silent. "To my son David, you told me I was too old to have opinions. You made me feel small, invisible. But I am neither. This will is my voice. You get nothing from me because you chose to take everything I gave you and throw it away. Maybe this will teach you the value of respect."
Mom.
David's hands clenched into fists. Claire stood up, her voice shaking with rage. "You can't do this." Thomas replied calmly, "She already has." They stormed out, slamming the door, leaving whispers of shock behind them. The room erupted in murmurs, but I sat there with a quiet smile. My silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. Yet, as I walked out of that room with Lily by my side, I felt eyes on me. I turned slightly and saw Claire staring from the hallway, her face twisted with a promise of vengeance. I knew this wasn't the end.
Not yet.
They were plotting something darker, something final. And I would be ready for them.